Our next guest enjoys the single biggest personal political mandate in the UK. He is, of course, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. Thank you for joining us this morning. So, as we say, that huge personal mandate, and yet when it comes to this sort of era-defining issue, Brexit, the vote on Tuesday, you have very few levers. You can do very little. Who are you talking to, and what change are you trying to affect?
Well, I was a member of Parliament for 11 years, and I genuinely think this Tuesday's vote is the biggest vote in Parliament for this generation of members of Parliament. I think it's the most important vote since the Iraq War. And so what I'm saying to all MPs of all parties across the country is to put aside tribal politics, think about what's in the best interest of your constituents and future generations. And so I'll be asking MPs on Tuesday to vote against this bad deal negotiated by the Prime Minister. Don't accept this blackmail about it being a bad deal or no deal whatsoever. And I'm hoping, if we don't succeed during the course of the week to have a new general election, that Parliament gives back control of the process to the public, bearing in mind Parliament's in gridlock. So
you are calling for all MPs to vote this down, despite the fact that after that, if we end up in that situation, the default position is no deal?
Well, that's not the case. We now know from the European Court of Justice...
legally, the default position is that if we don't have a deal, that we leave the European Union on the 29th of March. And are you prepared to take that risk?
Well, you start with the Prime Minister. Don't accept this nonsense from number 10 that it's this bad deal or no deal whatsoever. We know from the ECJ and the European Union that it's possible to either extend or withdraw Article 50. We know from the brave MPs who are holding the executive to account, they won't allow no deal whatsoever. So the key thing is to firstly defeat this deal on Tuesday, then look at the options.
Well, the backbenchers in the Commons, the House, there may not be a majority for no deal, but actually when it comes to it, it is the executive that has to put forward any legislation on this. And there are no signs of this happening whatsoever.
I thought those Brexiteers who campaigned to leave the EU wanted Parliament to take back control and Parliament to be sovereign. Parliament isn't the executive and ministers paid for being ministers, given a nice ministerial car and having nice offices. Parliament includes brave backbench MPs of all parties, including the Speaker.
And you were, of course, as you say, an MP for a long time, so you're speaking to colleagues, but you're on a very different page from the Labour Party leadership, aren't you?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, I speak as the Mayor of London, and I'm quite clear that actually, London is a city that benefits hugely from being in the EU. I think we could benefit even more being a member of a reformed EU. The position of the Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn's position is one that was passed at this year's party conference, and the position is this: to reject the deal done by Prime Minister May, to put out a motion for there to be another general election, and if that fails, for there to be a public vote. All options be on the table.
But as we get to this critical stage, is it not time for your party leader, as you say, to sort of take a stand and say, let's take this back to the people? Well, he's been very equivocal about his position. We've heard from other people, we know what the policy is from conference, but we know that Mr Corbyn is a lifelong Eurosceptic and shows very little sign of taking a firm position on this.
Well, I think even an impartial neutral can't criticise the leader of Her Majesty's official opposition from first wanting to have a general election, and that's what the motion...
So you agree with the position he's taking?
Well, as a Labour supporter, of course. Look, if I got a choice of the British public voting out this shower and bringing in a Labour government led by Jeremy Corbyn, of course I'd want that as the best option. If that doesn't succeed, the next best option is for the British public to take back control, bearing in mind Parliament's in gridlock, and bearing in mind the deal negotiated by the Prime Minister is such a bad deal.
There are those who suggest, and I think we've heard this from the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry, that those like yourself who are involved in the People's Vote campaign or supporting the People's Vote campaign are actually, it's actually more political, that you're trying to kind of cause trouble, you have it in for the leadership and you don't actually like their position.
Well, I was with Jeremy on Tuesday, so I'm not sure if that's the case. But look, the reality is there are, like any families, the Labour Party as a family have parliamentarians, activists, trade unionists with a range of views.
You're actually in disagreement with the head of your family at the moment, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I've just said that I support the motion passed at party conference. I support the tactics of our leadership, which is to try and first get a general election. if that doesn't succeed, for then there to be a public vote. And that's why I think you can't criticise, with respect, the Labour Party for first one is form of government. If that doesn't happen, and if MPs decide against that motion, then I would hope MPs would support the idea of giving the public a say for the first time on whether they accept the outcome of the negotiations with the option of staying in the EU.
So if, and as we expect at the moment, the Prime Minister loses this vote on Tuesday, what's your first phone call?
On Tuesday? If
she loses?
Yeah, well, as you know, what Parliament's decided is for the government to be asked to come back within 3 days with their so-called Plan B. I think a discussion that the leadership will have to have is when they think they can best win a vote of no confidence in Parliament to get a general election.
And do you take a view on that?
For me, the sooner the better, because I think the sooner there's a Labour government, the better we'll start fixing the mess left by the Tories, from the NHS to policing, from schools to our benefit system, and I think that the sooner that comes, the better.
OK, and we're going to come to some of those subjects now. It is less than a year and a half until the Mayor of London will be judged again at the polls. So how well has he delivered on his manifesto pledges in the policy areas that most affect the lives of Londoners? Bhavani Vadi has been speaking to 4 experts to find out.
Brexit has been front and centre of Sadiq Khan's mayoralty, his pro-EU stance featuring prominently in the New Year's Eve fireworks. He's championed the message that London is open after the Brexit vote.
As well as being a figurehead for the capital, the mayor's main powers lie in shaping the policies that affect the everyday lives of Londoners. He has an annual budget of around £17 billion to help deliver his vision for the city. So around midway through this mayoral term, is Sadiq Khan keeping his manifesto promises?
Transport is where the London Mayor has the most power to have a direct impact, but it's also the policy area where he's had high-profile difficulties, including the £1 billion funding black hole for Transport for London and the delay to opening Crossrail, meaning a further loss of fares revenue.
Well, he's managed to deliver on things like the hopper fare, which is for cheaper bus journeys, but he has failed on a couple of key things. Pedestrianising Oxford Street, he's come up against Westminster Council. He hasn't delivered as much cycle improvements as had been promised. I think Sadiq made one big mistake during the election campaign, which was to promise to freeze fares. He's now got a real financial crisis because fewer people are using the London Underground and the buses. The costs are going up.
The Mayor promised to make London safer, but 2019 had a tragic start with the murder of 14-year-old Jaden Moody, and violent crime has risen on his watch. He set up the Violence Reduction Unit with £500,000 of funding in September and raised his share of council tax to increase money for the Met.
Well, there's no doubt that the government has cut resources to policing. I think probably the Mayor spent a bit more time arguing with the government about the problem than being seen absolutely directly to be tackling it on the ground. People expect the Mayor to bring down knife crime and other violent crime incidents. I don't think they care about the arguments with other bits of government. They just want the numbers to start coming down.
Sadiq Khan has more to celebrate on housing. Just over 12,500 affordable homes were started in the last financial year, the highest under any Mayor of London, although fewer than 5,500 were actually completed in that period. The capital needs around 66,000 new homes a year, and that looks a long way from being achieved.
I think the key achievement for Sadiq is getting the money that he's got out of government. He's got £4.82 billion from government, and not only that, he's got the flexibility to use a reasonably large chunk of that money for social rented housing, which we haven't seen built in London since 2010. One key promise from Sadiq Khan's manifesto was that half of all homes built in London would be affordable, and that's an immensely difficult thing to deliver. It's certainly not going to be something he delivers in his first term.
The Mayor's pledged to restore London's air quality to legal and safe levels. To do that, he's introduced the T-charge for more polluting vehicles, brought forward the introduction of the ultra-low emission zone in central London to next April, and plans to extend it to the North and South Circular.
He's made good progress. So, for example, by the first few days in January, we would have seen breaches of the annual legal limit for nitrogen dioxide. And so far we haven't seen a single exceedance of that across London, which really is a significant improvement. But he does need to do a lot more, I think, in his mayoral term. And there is a persistent problem from diesel vehicles.
Londoners may have high expectations of what the city's mayor can achieve. They have a year and a half to judge him on whether he's kept the promises he's made.
Well, there's certainly a lot to talk about. Let's start with transport. Was that partial freeze of fares a mistake?
Not at all. I'm really proud. Look, what's the experience of Londoners since I've been the mayor? In the years before I became mayor, they saw fares increase by more than 42%. Since I've been mayor, TfL fares have been frozen. So this January, we'll have seen a 9% increase across other transport fares, but they've been frozen in TfL. They've also, over my first term, all saved £200 per household. But secondly, they've seen this fantastic hopper scheme. We've seen 250 million Londoners benefiting from the hopper scheme. We've had the night tube, the night overground. So Londoners are seeing the benefits of a Labour mayor.
Benefits, and yet usage has dropped. Perhaps you couldn't have foreseen that, but you have this financial, black hole now, and the freeze is only making that worse. Are you going to commit to continuing the freeze in your next term? Should you have one?
Let me deal with all 3 points that you raised during that one question. Firstly, in relation to usage, experts say that because of our fares freeze, that's one reason why usage of the Underground, London Overground and DLR has gone up, when around the country there's been a massive drop in use of public transport. So actually, having a fares freeze makes economic sense as well. Secondly, in relation to plans going forward, I can confirm that for the rest of my first term as mayor, I will continue to freeze TfL fares. And when it comes to what I do in term 2, I'm not ruling it out, but I will unveil my manifesto probably on your programme in the weeks and months preceding the 2020 election.
So you're not ruling it out.
Yeah.
How are you going to fill that black hole?
Well, I'm quite clear, though, that given the choice of raising fares by 42% or freezing fares over 4 years, Londoners prefer the latter rather than the former. But it's also really important to realise that actually here in London, public transport must mean transport for the public, which means it's affordable, it's reliable and it's safe. All three things delivered by a Labour mayor.
Not to labour the point, but how are you going to plug that black hole? It's a huge amount of money.
In the year before I became mayor, if you exclude the Operation Grant, which the government's taken away from us, so we receive on average every year £700 million from the government. That's been taken away from us. But if you take that away from the year before I became mayor, our deficit was £1.5 billion in 2015-2016. A guy called Boris Johnson was the mayor then. £1.5 billion. We've reduced that deficit by more than half in just 2.5 years. We've reduced operating costs from TfL, and we predict in the next 4 years that deficit will be a surplus, even though the government's taken away £700 million a year from our grant.
But people listening to that will feel a little confused. The deficit may have come down, but it is still there. It is still large. It is considerable.
Billion, Boris was the mayor.
It is considerable. We've seen flagship policies like the pedestrianisation of Oxford Street go by the wayside, delays to Crossrail.
Let me talk about that.
Well, please do.
So Oxford Street is a classic example of us putting aside party politics to see a Labour mayor working with a Conservative council to deliver on a promise.
To cancel a large policy.
Well, to deliver on a plan to pedestrianise Oxford Street. And for 2 years, we worked closely with the council. We consulted at huge expense. The businesses were on side. At the 11th hour, the council decided to pull the rug underneath these plans. Now, I don't think you should play party politics when it comes to air quality and when it comes to safety. The Tory council chose to do so. Notwithstanding that, we're still moving ahead with plans to have more people walking and cycling and using public transport across our city for no other reason to deal with the issue of air quality that was addressed so articulately by Simon Burkett.
OK, and when it comes to Crossrail, of course, we now know delays, political disputes about who said what to who, when. You're supposed to be overseeing this. What is going on?
Well, the joint sponsors are the DfT and TfL, so it's Chris Grayling and myself, and both of us, the DfT and TfL, are very angry and frustrated, not just by what we weren't told, but also by the delay. We've now got in place, because of the new powers we have, because of the new money, a new chief executive, a new director of finance, a new chair, a new deputy chair. And so as soon as they've got confidence in relation to when construction will be finished, it's quite clear the previous team, we can have no confidence in the information they gave us, we will be letting Londoners know when Crossrail will open up. This will be a fantastic project when she opens up. OK,
let's move on to one of the other policy areas now, crime, something that is deeply, deeply worrying to many Londoners, the rise in violent crime, both guns, knives, the murder rate. Do you take any responsibility for that rise?
I'm the mayor. Buck stops with me. I was with Jada Moody's family on Friday, and you can't escape the human consequences of the increase in violent crime. Since 2014, around the country, and that includes London, I'm not going to apologise for continuing to lobby for more resources for our city. We've seen over the last 7 or 8 years massive cuts in our policing budget. I'm going to continue to make the case we need more police officers. We have fewer police officers now than any time since 2003, but we're doing what we can from City Hall. What are we doing?
Well,
we set up a City Hall funded...
We've heard Tony Travers in the film there say that actually you need to be taking more responsibility.
Well, if I could answer the question, I'll try to do so. And I was trying to explain examples of how we're taking responsibility. So City Hall is funding a new violent crime task force, almost 300 officers, whose job is to target areas of high knife crime, target habitual offenders. They've made thousands of arrests. They've taken thousands of weapons off our streets, including guns, knives and other offensive weapons. The second thing we've done from City Hall as part of responsibility is to invest a huge amount of money, £45 million in young people doing constructive things to do. Bearing in mind over the last 7 or 8 years, we've seen youth workers lose their jobs, youth centres closed down, and young people have not having constructive things to do. And the third part is we've set up England's first violence reduction unit, learning the lessons from Glasgow.
It appears to, it's taken 2 years to get to this point, till September. Why so long? Many people would have said 2 years ago the writing was on the wall when it came to the increase in crime, the increase in violent crime, knives, guns. They were on our streets. People were saying they were worried about it. Why has it taken 2 years for you to get to this position, setting this up?
That's not quite right, though, is it? So yes, you're right. Violent crime was going up across the country from 2014, but we've been taking steps from 2016. So I became the first mayor in 8 years to increase council tax to pay for additional policing, so we didn't fall off a cliff edge and we could manage the decline. It's a decline of police officers in our city, and we made decisions in my first budget to do so. We also, in my first year, published a knife and crime plan, taking on board the fact that we know the police by themselves can't arrest themselves out of this. We need to work closely with other key partners. But thirdly, the first thing in my first year as mayor, we had the biggest rollout of body-worn videos of any police force in the country, 21,000 body-worn videos. Why is that important? It's important because it gives the police confidence to use a really valuable tool of targeted, intelligence-led stop and search, but also gives members of the public confidence to know police are doing their job properly.
Do you have any concerns? Because in a lot of your answers where you're talking about policy in London on any number of issues, you are very regularly referring back to funding from central government. And some people will hear that and think, this man needs to take control, he needs to take responsibility. And is there a danger that with constantly referencing in this way, it is seen that you're not taking responsibility and you're antagonising government when really you should be trying to lobby them and work with them to get the funding that you say you need?
This goes back to the first discussion we had. This is why it's so important to have a general election, because what we've got to realise is actually a lot of the consequences of we're seeing in London is a direct result of cuts made from 2010 going forward. Let me give you two examples. Our councils in London work incredibly hard. Our councils in London have lost more than half their monies from central government over the last 8 years. In City Hall, the police is paid for by more than 70% by central government. I often make the point that actually we are the most centralised country in the Western world. Why do I make that point? Because councils, the mayor and others have very little scope to raise resources to do the things they want to do. That's why I continue to lobby for more devolution with the other mayors around the country. But I accept the point that one of the things I've got to do as mayor is to be an advocate and to lobby the government for more powers and resources. That's why credit where it's due from the experts saying we've managed to persuade the government to give us more resources to try and fix the housing crisis in London. Not enough. We need more powers by carrying lobbying to get those.
Yes, I just wanted to finally a question on housing, because of course this is something that is hugely important to people in the capital, particularly young people. There have been improvements in the numbers of affordable houses being built, but we are still missing targets. It is still far short of what is required. What are you doing?
Well, when you talk about the housing targets, so independent experts say we need, roughly speaking, 65,000 homes built in London every year to keep up with demand. That's not happened for decades. The only way you can get to that number is a combination of private developers, housing associations and councils. And that's why I'm saying to the government, you need to give us more resources and more powers. The good news, where I do have control in relation to affordable housing, we broke the record last year for the most numbers of genuinely affordable homes being started. We broke the record last year for those homes where you pay a social rent more than the previous 4 years put together and more than the rest of England. And this year, the target is even more ambitious. So we could be last year, this year and next year record breakers when it comes to affordable homes being started in London.
We will watch with interest and hold you to that. Thank you very much,
Always
Mr.
a pleasure.
Mayor.